I see it as two things. I do believe that, not surprisingly, that one of the key levers for our society is creating like better places for people to thrive. And at the same time, helping people make better decisions about where to live so they can thrive at each stage. We used to been in Austin for Texas for about 5 years. But previous to this, we lived in Baltimore, Maryland. In our zip code, which wasn't a large one in Baltimore, our neighboring zip code had a life expectancy that was 20 years less. I believe that there's really two key important levers. How can we create better places? And how can people make better decisions around this?
This is the Future Ready Advisor, a show about transforming your financial advisory practice. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan, a wealth management consultant, behavioral scientist, and keynote speaker. In this podcast, I dive deep into the real challenges advisors face and bring you insightful conversations with top industry experts. Together, we'll explore practical strategies grounded in behavioral science to help you better serve your clients, optimize your time, and build a future-ready practice. Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan. Welcome to today's episode of the Future Ready Advisor. Today, I'm here with Ryan Frederick, the founder of E.D.G.E, a movement he started to reshape how we live. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Looking forward to diving into a really interesting conversation. Let me quickly introduce you to our audience. I should call Ryan an environment specialist. His focus is on how we live and where we live impacts our health and well-being, especially as we age. As the founder of E.D.G.E, he helps individuals and communities make informed decisions about their living environments during retirement, ensuring that they stay connected and supported in their later years. I think this is such a timely topic, Ryan, and I'm really looking forward to diving in greater detail into it. Maybe before we start, you could share a little bit about your professional background and what really inspired you to focus on this intersection of health, longevity, and place.
Yeah, Sam, we have 3 teenage kids. One's a rising sophomore in college and 2 are in high school. And one of the things I've shared with them is life is not linear. And so if you asked me when I was graduating from high school or college, this is what I'd be focusing on, I would have been, what? I studied electrical engineering in college. And that in part, I think, was to avoid reading and writing. So now I'm an author and so on. I had a shorter version of a longer story, Sam. I worked in Silicon Valley coming out of college, and company went public. I was an early employee. I was like, wow, this business thing's easy. But then there was an ethical scandal in our company. And it really made me, some people went to jail. It really made me think about, wow, where I want to focus my energies and talents. And went back to business school at Stanford and decided, and this is 20 years ago, felt that there weren't many people thinking about all the implications of living a longer life. And one of those dimensions is place. And so I've, over the last 20 years I've actually, initially I lived in a senior living community. So I immersed myself, if you're into design thinking, it's one thing to actually like be there with people. Needless to say, I was fairly popular, being the only person under 30 and only male in my wing. And my wife decided not to join me. So I had a lot of unsolicited gifts and brunch invitations and so on. But what started from that has led to experiences as a private equity investor, as an executive for different housing companies in the space, and consulting with dozens of companies in the US, but abroad as well. And then more recently writing a book in this space, and just really appreciating, Sam, that for whatever reason, place is this really big decision, that we make. The average, American or Canadian adult moves a dozen times, and we get shaped more by our environment than we shape the environment. So it in some ways, if we want to determine who you want to be, look at the type of people that are where in a given place, because odds are you're going to adopt some of their habits and lifestyles.
Ryan, that resonates with me on so many levels. I love this concept of non-linearity. I tell people now, I'm in the same stage of life that you are. I tell people that I've mentored that what I thought was important or what my priorities were or what my definition of success in my teas was different than in my teas, than different in my different. I won't keep going on for no other reason than not to depress myself. The other point that you make about place, it's really resonated only in the last few years for me, how important that is. I grew up all over Canada. I went to the UK for my early part of my career. I came back to Canada. My wife is Austrian. She comes from a small
Mm,
town in Austria.
wow.
And as we get older, like we, everything that we wanted to leave behind, I guess, growing up, we all want to go to the big city, go to these exotic places. I think some of those are being reevaluated for us, I think personally, as to what is important. And this concept of place or environment, and that's the physical location, but I think the community around it, the people around it, etc. I think certainly for me and my situation, this is resonating more today than it ever did 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting, Sam. About 20 years ago, Dan Buettner wrote a book called Blue Zones.
Mm-hmm.
And part of National Geographic, and they went to different places, about a half dozen places where people live longer, healthier than other places in the world. And it resonated at the time. But as you may know, there were subsequent books, and then more recently, there was a Netflix series on kind of living to 100 and insights from these blue zones. And so I think you see this interest that you're describing that people have. I think, what does it look like to not just live longer, but live healthier longer, live better longer? I think you have that trend that's happening right now. And I think at the same time, you have another trend, which one might argue we're in the midst of the biggest global migration ever, which is this move from a physical world to this online world.
Mm.
And the conversation that we're having right now is a function of the online world that's made
Mm-hmm.
available. But if our lives are fully constructed in this virtual world, like what do we miss by not having a sense of kind of groundedness and rootedness? And you see it with the digital natives,
Mm-hmm.
our kids, their generation, and how do they navigate this? But I think for Gen Xers and boomers and so on, there's a displacement that's happened, both literally, where we've moved from place to place, but also figuratively. Are we necessarily as tied and rooted in a place that our ancestors used to be? And as you look at the research around healthy longevity, it's pretty overwhelming how important it is to have this sense of being known and being part of the social fabric of a community. And so their place is much more than a place to hang your hat. Place is much more than something that shows up as a material line item on your expenses, or perhaps a line item in your assets on your balance sheet. There's so much more that's wrapped into it. And because we have these different chapters in life, we really, if we're looking out for our future selves, we should be mindful. Are we really in the best place for each chapter?
I love that. This multi-dimensional construct of place, as you say, it isn't just, a roof and four walls. And you talk a lot, Ryan, about place planning. Can you explain what you mean by that and how you've seen this importance of place evolve in the context of healthy aging and longevity over the past few years? Exactly what you've been talking about.
Yeah, again, in that same thinking of nonlinear thinking and just the way life unfolds. So I had this background in the housing pieces, really for second half of life. So 55 plus communities, age targeted communities, senior housing. I'm an expert in this. I've got work with dozens of companies, know a lot of people. You would think that I would see all these dimensions of place, but it wasn't until I wrote the book and really did the research around it that I realized that the significance, the ramifications of this differentiation. And as I thought more about it, and as the book Right Place, Right Time kind of created these ripples in different circles, I realized that a lot of people aren't planning for place the same way that they plan for other things in their life. So, we're living a long life. You want to make sure, or probabilistically, one is you want to make sure you don't run out of funds. So, where do you turn to? Well, you turn to financial advisors, wealth advisors. Help me think through this. Am I the Monte Carlo analysis? Like what are the different scenarios that I need to be weighing in this? And then you for healthcare, you turn to doctors and primary care and specialists. And am I concierge doctors? Am I doing this the right way? And then you've got on the health side, you got nutritionists and gyms you might join and personal fitness coaches. But for whatever reason, this place thing, it's like really big decision. You go back to the science of longevity, it's especially for people in the second half of life, it's much more about lifestyle and environment. At
Mhm.
least 70%, most studies I've seen, it's north of 80%, we have agency in than our genetics. So it's much more about my lifestyle decisions in this environment. Yet when we're thinking about place, it's almost like it's hidden in plain sight. And so for the most part, it's really it's a do-it-yourself exercise. People sharing advice with each other, Google searching, learning from when people make mistakes. Because real estate brokers, they're really only there when there's a transaction.
Mhm.
They're also there to help you think about it. So I kind of realized in the process that what we're really talking about in this is has an analog with financial planning. It's place planning. How am I making sure that not only am I in the right place for every chapter in life, am I also activating that place? So I live in Austin, Texas. We live in a technically it's a city. It's really a suburb of Austin. It's a 10-minute e-bike ride to downtown. So we have a certain address. Technically, that's where we live, but it's not just where we live. How much do we activate it? Like
Mhm.
what do my friendship circles look like? How often, what ways am I engaged in the community? How physically active am I? It's not just again what place, it's in what way does your life follow what you're looking for out of that given place. So this place planning thing, Sam, I think it's a term I've coined in the process of this thinking as it's evolved. But I believe that there's a significant opportunity for people to be intentional and give some time and energy to this big decision. So you're optimizing it or close to optimizing it for each chapter of life.
I think that's a really interesting concept. And I wonder how much do you believe that the financialization, if you will, of real estate, that it's an asset that you can build up equity, that you go then trade it in to get the next bigger home or what have you. How much of that has changed people's outlooks from the home as a place in the broader context that you think about it to, okay, it's an item on my balance sheet or my personal balance sheet, and the only objective is to maximize that size, that how big of the balance sheet that it is?
I think it's a great question. I think it's a timely question. I think you have a number of people that are asking, I'm living this longer life. What do I really want it to look like? And even questions about, how much do I want to leave for my kids or family? I know there's a book came out a year ago, Die with Zero. And the argument was, wait a second, maybe as a society, we're focusing too much on just like net worth. And by the way, I'm not to suggest in any way financial security matters a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
people that for
Agreed.
a longer life that don't have that, there's a lot of stress associated with it. But I believe that there's more people, Sam, seeing this lens of these different dimensions that drive a healthy, purposeful life, longer life. And they recognize that being in the right place can drive a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that thinking, it raises questions about, per your question, if I look at this only as a financial asset, let's say, oh my gosh, I've had this house, I've been living in California, on the water and oh my goodness, like look at the value of this house. However, if it turns out you're socially isolated, if it turns out, your friends aren't around you and you're not eating well, you're not active the way you could be, then it may be the right place perhaps from a financial balance sheet perspective, but it may be nudging you down a path that actually won't help you live, your best life for that chapter. So I do think there's some people recognizing that it's broader, than just a financial asset or a place to hang your hat. And I actually think Blue Zones has been really helpful for this. I think it's because of the mainstream work through Netflix and so on. I think there's more people saying, wait a second, this matters. Maybe I don't want to move to Sardinia in Italy or to Japan or Costa Rica, but how do I effectively create my version of a Blue Zone in an area that they're more familiar with? But that happens through planning. It just doesn't happen by accident.
So that is a conversation that financial advisors should be having with their clients to get them to think about their place in a broader construct than just the financial element of it. What do you suggest that financial advisors do with clients, or what are you doing with your clients? Like, what key considerations are you emphasizing that they should think about when deciding whether to stay in their current home or move as they approach retirement?
Yeah, Sam, I think I'd say step one is for people to understand, like we were talking earlier, this is a multi-dimensional thing and it's foundational for your healthy longevity. So if you don't appreciate the ways in which place impacts your life, you're more likely to make a suboptimal decision.
Mm.
And so for those, get these key transitions, empty nesters, pre-retirees, retirees, and then I would say people really in their mid 70s or so, where now there's more consideration around healthcare that people start to think about. And so understand it's a big decision, understand it's a multi-dimensional decision, and then recognize that whether you decide to go somewhere or not, that's a decision. So one of the things that's happened with the work that the courses and coaching that we've been doing, Sam, is that there are a number of people that their intent is to age in place, stay where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go through a process. They do the planning. They have
Mm-hmm.
a plan on the other side, and they decide to do the same thing. They do want to age in place, but it's one thing to say it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different thing to actually have a plan to show that actually it's feasible under a number of different conditions, and that it's something that is the best course. Part of the effort too, Sam, is to recognize that there's a multitude of different options, because it's not just stay where you are. There's an option that says stay where you are and do nothing, like same life, no physical changes,
Right.
no change in friends, whatever. Although regardless, just life changes, like places change and you change. So what might be fine in one chapter may be the wrong place for another chapter. But nonetheless, it's not just stay there and move to one place. Part of the exercise is helping people understand there are a range of different options you could go choose to go do. And especially for those that are intent on going somewhere else and they have resources and they have the ability or a willingness to go to a number of different places, that can be a challenging problem, because where do you start, trying to figure this out? Back to the wealth advisors and financial advisors, I think there's an important role, Sam, in this, because in the work that we've done partnering with wealth advisors, is that there's a subset typically of people's clients where place is on the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And for those people, like, I think it can occupy a lot of their mind share, actually, because maybe they feel like their current place isn't the right one, or maybe they have family that's somewhere else, or want to be closer to them. And I think one of the opportunities for financial advisors, wealth advisors, is the more that they can be kind of in tune with those people, the more that they can kind of meet them where they are. Okay, I get it. This is an important decision for you. It's financial, but it's also non-financial. So I like to describe it as quasi-financial. And in those situations, wealth advisors, financial advisors can, I think, add more value by meeting where they are and trying to find, resources that can help them ultimately make a better decision. There's a wealth advisory group, an RIA in Maryland, And they've started actually to do work in place planning. We've partnered with them because what they found is a number of people, in their case, people more in their mid-70s, were making bad decisions around place. And so it was starting to compromise the financial fidelity of their planning. And it was also impacting their quality of life. And they recognized, wait a second, if we're really trying to help people be ultimately successful in their lives, this is an area that we probably should lean into. So I think, like I said, I think first step is this is a big decision. It's multidimensional. Understand that. And I think to some degree, people can self-select. Is this something in my mind right now or not? And for those where it's not, maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe they're in a perfect place right now. They got bigger things to focus on. But for those where it is an issue or should be, then I think there's an opportunity to come alongside people and help them with place planning.
Look, you're absolutely right. And I would add to that is planning of any sort is forward thinking, right? So if you are thinking about moving because this isn't the right place, this is a role for that wealth advisor, financial advisor to play, is meet, as you say, meet your client where they are. Address the fact, okay, why are you doing this? Why do you want to do this? Okay, maybe it's a financial reason. But part of that non-financial element of planning that the advisor can sit there and help the client think through is, okay, what about friends? What about your community? What about the gym? What about the religious institution that you belong to? Like, how are those things going to be impacted and what are you going to do about it? And this is where, to your point, where, look, if the client isn't ready to talk about it, okay, they're not ready to talk about it.
Right.
But these are things that, from a planning perspective, because it impacts the financial plan, it impacts the when you retire, the timing and everything else. These aren't things that you can think about putting into place, or you shouldn't be thinking about putting into place after you've done your retirement. You want to think about it and do some of that work a year, 2 years, 5 years beforehand.
That's exactly right. And it's not, again, the thing about place, which makes it more difficult in some regards, it's a big decision. So especially if your decision is to do something, you want to do your research. You know, there's stories I share as part of the work that we do where people have these, oh, whoops moments. And it's okay, you know, gosh, maybe I should have worn blue jeans instead of black jeans. You know, that's not a high risk decision. But if your decision is to pick up shop and sell your possessions and move to a new place and then find out that what you thought it was isn't what it is, like that's financially costly. It's emotionally costly. Can be relationally costly. And for I would say for the individual or couple, but also for the advisors, you don't want to have your clients make these decisions. I have a small example I use in Austin. We've got an acquaintance of mine lives in our broader neighborhood. His kids gone, they're empty nesters, and they wanted to be the cool kids and move downtown. There's a number of new apartments and condos that are being built in Austin. And so they did that. Like, you know, we can do this. We're going to sell our house. And they found this cool condo. And of course, the furniture they've had for, you know, decades in their suburban Austin home didn't fit the vibe of the condo downtown. And it was also probably a quarter or a third of the size of their house in the suburbs. So they sold their house, sold the furniture, you know, bought new stuff. And of course, the friends are largely in the suburbs and the guy, he works for a law firm. He can walk to work. That was part of the allure. And their friends would come see him, you know, first few months. Oh, we get to go see your friends and we'll go, you know, eat at a hip restaurant, grab a drink at that hip bar. But then after a few months, you know, the friends weren't coming as much. It was easier just to stay in their neighborhood and hang out with other friends. And the people in their condo building were friendly, but they didn't really hit it off as much. It was hard to make some friends there. And his wife was more of a green thumb than necessarily she fully realized. They had no, you know, space in their condo to support plants. And about a year into it, they kind of looked at each other and they had a whoops moment. They said, we shouldn't have done this. So they then went through the process of selling their condo and then finding a house back in their old neighborhood, and which the markets calmed down a bit. But at the time this was happening, it was hard to find a house and costly and all these things. And they would have been much better served instead. What if we do an Airbnb for a
Hmm.
week,
Hmm.
2 weeks? What if
Hmm.
we, rent our house for a year and then we rent an apartment, really test it out? And so these are big decisions. You just don't want to get them wrong. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but like use some elements of testing it. Design thinking is the term that a number of companies use, universities around innovation. And so there's some ways to use some of those lessons here. So yeah, it matters, and for these big decisions that matter, that are costly if you get them wrong, I think that behooves people to plan.
I love that example. It's so vivid. And this idea of testing and learning is so bang on. I remember more extreme than your stories, but I remember having wealthy clients who could afford, for tax and other reasons, to
Yeah.
decide they're leaving Canada and they're going down to the Caribbean and they're going to have the island lifestyle. And that's a bigger move than your
Yeah.
couple that you talked about going from the suburbs to downtown. But they up and moved, and again, 6 months, a year, it's great. The weather is great, but after that, they realized that their family, their community, their whole, I guess, essence was back home, if you will. And it is a question of, why did we do this? Everything can be reversed, but your point about testing and learning so that you don't have to undo it is probably a prudent course of action, if you can.
And just to add to that for a second, Sam, in some cases, in some situations, it's not reversible. And let's say there's a house that you really have the strong identity as home. And you sell it, you move on, and then you realize you make a mistake. It's going to be difficult for you to literally buy your old house back.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point.
and particularly as if these chapters are a little bit longer, neighborhoods change, social networks change. And so I know sometimes people think, oh my gosh, we have some friends that lived in Dallas for a while and they moved away and then they came back 10 years later, maybe 7 years later. And the Dallas in their mind
Hmm.
that they lived in was different than the Dallas they moved to.
Hmm.
And so they only lasted there a year, went back to where they were before. So it's not to say you can't rectify pieces of it, but there are elements of this that you can't fully reverse, depending on your situation in particular. It doesn't mean one shouldn't think about ways to make their lives better by contemplating scenarios that involve a move, for sure, and acting on some of those. Like, it shouldn't make people risk averse, but I think it also just helps people appreciate that these are just like any decision in life. They're different
Hmm.
doors,
Hmm.
and which door do you want to go down?
It's a great point. It reminds me of it's a very old Greek saying that you can't cross the same river twice, because the next time you come to that river, it's not the same river, right?
Yes,
But
exactly,
the
exactly.
couple that for the Dallas, it's not the same Dallas.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
So one of the things that we've been talking about, Ryan, is the concept of connection as being an important aspect for healthy aging. So what advice would you give financial advisors to get their clients to think strategically about their living arrangements and the sense of community and connection in retirement?
So I had this fascinating conversation with the head of an office of a very large RIA recently, and we talked about longevity. And I said, how much do you talk to your clients about the importance of relationships and longevity? And she said, what? No, we only talk about like supplements and working out and things like that. And it shocked me because we're reading different articles, apparently, because there's a Harvard study. It's I think one of the longest running studies. It's been running for 85 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been tracking the impact of this cohort of men initially, and then their families, and then their kids. The way it's pretty fascinating. There's several books that have been written about it now. And in that study, they point the number one factor to people living long, healthy lives is the quality of their relationships when they were 60. What they found was, for the people that had strong relationships, a strong sense of connection with those that, care for them and so on, they were more likely to pursue the type of lifestyle attributes that are indicative of a healthy long life. So it's not that they weren't eating healthy things. It just happened to be, because they were, but it just happened to be it was the connection, it was the tie of these relationships that mattered so significantly. And going back to our conversation earlier, elements of our conversation earlier, we're in such a unique place in time because, it used to be a few generations ago that you like knew your neighbor. If you knocked on their door, you weren't assumed to be a solicitor or
answer the door.
you'd answer the door. Right? You'd answer the door. And if you answered the door and it's likely your neighbor like knew your name, knew your story. And so because of a range of different things that have happened, we actually have to work at friendships in a deeper way than we have had before, at the same time that people are living longer. So when we're younger, we got college, early, shenanigans in our first jobs in cities or whatever your story is. And then when you have young kids, that tends to be a time that bring people together. Places of worship often are a gathering spot, but we've also seen that the regularity of people going to a place of worship at a regular, that's been, kind of going down in the process. And so there are fewer places now in our home environment that we connect with people. And it's an issue I think it's a harder issue for people midlife and beyond. It's a particularly challenging issue actually for men as this plays out. And so I think it's a really key question that now I know some financial advisors may lean into those sort of questions, more so than others. But if we're trying to ask people, are they positioning themselves to really thrive in this longer life? Asking questions about, the health of their social connections matters. There's a friend of mine that recently came out with a book, and she summarized, she calls it social health. A third of the people in the US are lonely. The Surgeon General described roughly half people don't know their neighbors. Surgeon General came out last year, said we have an epidemic of loneliness. So there's definitely a portion of people where their lack of social connection, their perceived lack of, is such a big deal that it truly is impacting their health. But no matter where you are, this idea of investing in your relationships it's part of the key to a long, healthy life. And so I think there probably is a role for wealth advisors to ask these questions, if they feel so. At least I think it could be insightful to meeting where their people are. But it also, Sam, some places make it easier to make friends than others. So if you're in a spot where, you don't know anyone and you don't, the general psychographics, the way people think is not consistent with who you are, that can be a real challenge. One just short example, it may be not quite as heightened in Canada as in the US, but we've got a presidential campaign a few months away. And if you're a blue person where there's a lot of red, it may be hard, to make friends. So and vice versa. So just understanding at the macro level, are you in a spot where people like you are there to make friends? It matters.
I think there's so much there, Ryan. I totally agree with that. And yes, we're watching the US presidential election closely. And that level of, I guess, if you will, polarization that exists perhaps in pockets of the US, it is starting to exist in parts of Canada.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting point that you made, and I just want to touch on it a little bit, I think the book was Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam. And he talked about a lot of the things that you highlighted here, that the fact that places of worship aren't things that people go to, that community organizations, whether it's things like the Kiwanis, the Rotary, the Lions Club, local sports teams or whatever, there is this concept, and I've written about it, that we take it for granted, right? That we have this community that is a part of the fabric of who we are. And the challenge is, and it's ironic that we're living in this world right now, like we're talking across the internet, across North America, and we have so much connection because of what social media and internet and everything else provides, which is great. At the same time, we have this level of loneliness and depression and anxiety that is, again, off the record charts, right? Yeah. And you talk about men. I mean, the stat I heard is that the average man, middle-aged man, is lucky if they can count 3 or 4 good friends. I think again, I think your point is valid. I don't know that a wealth advisor is going to solve that problem, and I think a lot of wealth advisors are going to shy away from being that therapist, if you will, of asking that question. But I don't think that's what you're saying. These are questions that are deep and don't necessarily have an answer. But what a wealth advisor can do is be that person that asks that question, puts that thought in that client's head, and say, you should think about this. Maybe you know the answer. Maybe you've been giving it some thought, but just recognize that here are the statistics.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to be one of the statistics, these are the things that you should think about.
So totally. So I write a lot about social capital, which is really a term that was coined by Putnam. I met Putnam in his offices probably about a decade ago. We talked about some of this stuff, and he's funny because so that particular book he wrote around, I think, 2000 or so. But what ended up happening was it's only become more and more popular because, unfortunately, he was too right. It's like his thesis around the social fabric has become more and more true, unfortunately. And so these terms, more people are talking about Putnam now. In fact, there's a documentary called Join or Die that's out that his former classmates made. I'll send you a link afterwards. But nonetheless, it's a big thing. And I think here's what I would say. This is one of the interesting things about place is for most people, your living expenses are a material line item in your financial longevity plan. For most people, your primary residence or your secondary residence that you own are material in your asset line of your balance sheet. When you ask questions about place, those are inherently financial questions, but offer more. And I would hope that most financial planners and wealth advisors are asking these questions anyway. But I believe that the intake form, when you have new clients coming in, there should be specific questions about place. Part of the annual review, there should be specific questions about place, where things as simple as, hey, do you feel like this is the right place for you now? Do you feel like this is the right place for you 5 years from now? Why or why not? And and especially if people understand that the multidimensional components of place means that there's an invitation for them to say, you know what, Sam, I used to know all my neighbors. I used to, golf, but I don't now. Like things have changed, same address, but it's a different place. We probably should think about this in a way that we haven't before. Or also something that happens too is going back to the social connection piece. People's friendship networks change, especially in retirement, because people do move to different places. So, of course, the Northeast, and I'm sure parts of Canada, maybe it happens more often than if you're already planted in Florida. But just recognizing that there's enough change over a 5-year period, let's say, that what you think might be true now might be different down the road, which may require some planning. So there could be a Trojan horse, I would say, with the place dimension that could be an invitation for better insights with your clients and could give you a perspective to help them in a way that might be different than that says, okay, Sam, list your 5 best friends. Where are they? People, hey, well, hold a second. That's I'm not going to answer that. But there could be ways to get to some of that may be less, more natural, I guess.
I think it's a great point. I had an advisor on this podcast who characterized that as a difference between 2D questioning. And so your example is right there where, look, an advisor will already ask a client and they're fact-finding or whatever. Okay, tell me about your home. Is it paid for? What's the size of it? So that's the 2D thinking or the 2D questioning. The questions that you're suggesting, that's the 3. Is this the right place for you? Now, do you think it will be the right place for you, in 5 years from now? Why? And I think you're right. It's just a shift in thinking to move from that financial to the non-financial element. It's more open-ended questions I don't think for most advisors that should be too far out of their comfort zone. You're not getting into how many friends do you have and are you active in your religious community or whatever. You're not going in any of those decisions. You're just getting them to start thinking a little bit more holistically, if
Yes.
I can use that overused word,
Yep.
about what retirement and place and assets and community and everything else means.
I love that. Yeah, totally agree.
Ryan, maybe the last question for you is, what is your vision for the future of healthy aging and community living? And how do you see that the work that you're doing is contributing to that vision?
Yeah, ending with a softball. I see it as two things. I do believe that, not surprisingly, that one of the key levers for our society is creating like better places for people to thrive. And at the same time, helping people make better decisions about where to live so they can thrive at each stage. We used to been in Austin for Texas for about 5 years. But previous to this, we lived in Baltimore, Maryland. In our zip code, which wasn't a large one in Baltimore, our neighboring zip code had a life expectancy that was 20 years less. So we've got places in the US, maybe less so in Canada, but we've got places in the US where you could have dramatically different life expectancy, and I would also say quality of life outcomes based on where you live, because so much of it translates to your lifestyle in different decisions, quality of education, quality of food, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that there is an enormous societal opportunity to put more of a focus on place as a key driver for healthy longevity. People in the healthcare space talk about the social determinants of health and housing being part of that. So my work really contributes in two different ways, Sam. Part of it is personally do keynote speaking and strategy consulting to, I'll call it the supply side, helping real estate developers, certain municipalities, health systems, and so on. How can we just create better places? How can we create apartments, for example, that think about the impact of a long life? What would that mean for the design of the apartment? What does it mean for the integration of universal design features? I recently joined the advisory council of Stanford Center on Longevity. These are the things they think about. How do we create a society that's designed for this longer life? So I think we've got a real opportunity globally to create better places. At the same time, I believe there's an opportunity for people to make more informed decisions about, am I in the right place at the right time? And back to much of our dialogue here today, am I thinking about it in this multidimensional way? Because if I decide to age in place, which is most people, that's their default, at least in the US, that may work, or it could be an invitation for social isolation. It could be an invitation for lack of purpose. It could be an invitation not being physically active the way that you could be, or eating as well as you could. So I believe that there's really two key important levers. How can we create better places? How can people make better decisions around this? What I often find is that people, consumers, as they're thinking about this, whether they're working with them directly or through a wealth advisor, they're like, man, I wish there were better options. And just to end on that piece, what I think is going to happen, Sam, is you're going to see more. It's expensive right now because interest rates are higher and cost of construction is higher and so on. But in general, as things normalize a bit, I think you're going to see more homes, single family homes, more apartments, more condos, where people are thinking about two things. One, how does this work for an older population? Because it's going to represent a higher percentage of what we've had in the past. And the second one is, in what ways can we make it easier for people to live healthier lives in this place? And that may mean ways in which places are designed to facilitate getting to know each other. For example, in apartment buildings, making it a little bit easier to have one place where all the mail is, and that's where people have this serendipity kind of connections, but has social implications for connections as ways in which, how can we make just being active, walking, easier to happen. I know I'm a big biker.
Mhm.
So being able to have bike lanes in places that people can use for bikes or e-bikes, I just think you're going to see more infrastructure to say, wait a second, we're going to do more to just make health easier for a longer life. So I'm hopeful that these levers will be pulled on more in the future.
That's a great point, Ryan. And maybe I'll just add this one point is that when you are talking about this idea of thinking about designing places where serendipity occurs and people have the social interactions, I couldn't help but think how grocery stores are designed right now, right? Like, so the staples that you have as milk and eggs or whatever that you go pick up on a regular basis, they're always put in the back corner of the grocery store so that
Yeah,
the designers want you to go through all the aisles.
yeah,
I think to your point, that kind of thinking to come in to say, okay, how do we encourage social interaction amongst this group that may not otherwise do it? It's a selling feature for for a condo or a housing development, but it also solves this existential question that we've been talking about for this conversation.
yeah. Your Starbucks is under pressure right now. I don't know. I think I saw something. The CEO may be out. I don't know. But nonetheless, there's been pressure on Starbucks. When Starbucks worked really well, it was a third place. A third
Hmm.
place is a
Hmm.
place to gather outside of the first place, which is your house or home. Second place is your workplace, which is under a lot of pressure right now with hybrid working and so on. The third place is these other spots. And Starbucks, in its drive for efficiency in a number of locations, has squeezed out the third place dimension. And with that, it's, I think, impacted some of their financials. So I agree with you. I think you're going to see some groups, some communities rally around models that say, you know what, this is better for me. And maybe I pay a little bit more for it. Maybe I give up different trade-offs, but I think there's going to be more and more recognition. Like we've been saying earlier, some of these healthy habits or lifestyle things actually take work. And if I'm in a place where I'm just nudged
Hmm.
in certain ways to live better, have better, makes for better friendships, that's a better decision for me. So I'm optimistic. I know we're going to have some bumps along the road. And I think there's a really important role for place planning and wealth advisors to come alongside clients and say, hey, wait, there are options out there. Here's how to think about it.
Awesome. Ryan, we're coming to the end of our podcast. So I have a few final rapid fire questions for you that I
Yeah.
ask all of my guests. So number one, professionally, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years?
Well, we touched on earlier, I do as an entrepreneur and been involved in other number of adventures and misadventures. It's life's nonlinear. That's the biggest piece. So recognize it's nonlinear, recognize there's pivots that happen in life. Also recognize what you believe in is true and stick to that. I've seen that really play out significantly in my life.
That's great advice. And number two, what is one practical tip you would offer listeners keen on applying your insights?
You know, as we've talked about, Sam, I would say the biggest thing for your audience, both personally and for those, active in the wealth advisory financial planning business, is give place the respect that it deserves. Meaning, see it as foundational for your health and longevity.
Hmm.
It's more than just a place to hang your hat. It's more than just something, either an expense or asset. See it as this gateway to either help you be the person you want to be or, hold you back from that. And I think the more that you're aware of that individually or also as a wealth advisor, the more likely you'll be able to see ways in which your place is perhaps the right one for you or ways in which it may not be.
Ryan, this has been a fascinating discussion. If listeners want to learn more about you or find your work, where do they go?
Yeah, two things. I would suggest visiting the Here website, which is here.life, HERE.LIFE. And there you'll see content around what we've just talked about. There's an assessment people can take to help you see this in this three-dimensional way that we've been talking about and allow us just based on your own input to get a sense, are you in the right place for a given chapter that you're in? So that's a key spot. Also, there are gateways for individuals as well as wealth advisors to get more involved in place planning. The second place is active on LinkedIn. So it's Ryan E. Frederick on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Regular content around these issues, some of which is geared towards wealth advisors, some of which is broader than that. And that's a good way to get plugged in. I think as we've talked about, it's in some detail, but not at great length. I'm not the expert in this. You're much more than I am, but I do think the wealth advisory space and financial advisory space is in a moment of flux.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that groups look to add more value to their clients, I think that's an area of opportunity to retain business as well as to add business. And I believe that place planning can be a nice add-on for people to just add more value, to their clients, especially for those where this is it's an important issue for them.
Awesome. Ryan, this has been great. And thank you for joining us today on the Future Ready Advisor.
Yeah, my pleasure, Sam. Really enjoyed it.
In this episode, I spoke with Ryan Frederick, the founder of E.D.G.E and a proponent of place planning. Here are my 3 key takeaways. Number 1, the concept of place planning. Just as people consult financial advisors for wealth management, Ryan advocates for the intentional planning of one's living environment. Advisors can play a crucial role in guiding clients through place decisions that balance lifestyle, community, and financial goals. Number 2, the changing importance of home. Ryan and I discussed how the perception of home is shifting from a mere financial asset to a core element of our well-being. As people age, the decision of where to live is no longer just about building equity, but also about creating an environment that supports a fulfilling and healthy lifestyle. Number 3, social connections are critical. Strong relationships are a major determinant of longevity. Ryan highlighted how our living environments can foster or inhibit these connections, making it vital for financial advisors to discuss social health and community engagement with clients as part of long-term planning. You've been listening to the Future Ready Advisor. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify, or share your feedback wherever you listen. Be sure to follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. For more insights on how to keep your practice future ready, visit www.samsivarajan.com. You can find the link on the show notes. There you'll find free tools and resources, along with exclusive bonus content from these podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to sharing more strategies with you in the next episode.